silence. I would like to have a moment of silence for the violence over the weekend in Chicago and Atlanta. That wasn't much shown on the news, but it did happen, and I think we should recognize it and have a moment of silence for it. Thank you. Can we have roll call, please?
Yes. Mr. LeBlanc?
Here.
Mr. Salazar? Mr. Rutledge?
Here.
Mrs. Costa?
Here.
Mrs. LeBlanc?
Here.
Mrs. Hall?
Here.
Mrs. Thurston?
Here.
Mr. Ryder? Well,
I'm here, but I'm
Oh.
traveling, and as soon as I reach my destination, I'll turn my camera on. Thank you.
excellent. Okay. Chairman Cruzel?
Here. And Mr. Salazar should be joining us shortly. So, all right, we'll start with board guests. And I notice Chris Cycley's on, but wasn't someone from Emily was supposed to be on from the architects, correct?
Yes. Yeah, to present the FF&E presentation. I just called her and she didn't pick up, so I'm going to try again. We may have to. Oh, there she is.
Yes, there she is.
There we go.
Hold on, give her a second to log in.
And I believe we'll have Randy Daigle join as well in a minute or two here.
Well, if you want to start before Randy jumps on, that's fine.
Oh, sure, no problem.
And Kathy, Bill did join us, so. All right, so you're on.
Okay, great. I'm going to share my screen. Can everybody see this? I'm going to go to full screen mode here. Okay.
We got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. So I wanted to start with that we started our FF&E process with the staff, with the principal and the team back in March, just as the COVID quarantine hit us. So we had to adjust our plan a little bit. What we normally would do was meet with the staff individually, as we had done during the construction design process. And instead, we started with some internal meetings with the smaller group, and then created these surveys that we sent out to all of the staff members, the department heads, and each of the specialized groups. And those surveys were completed. There were options for them to select from, lists of furniture, quantities for them to check on, and as well as just, providing answers to some of our questions about storage needs and, do you need mobile furniture, fixed furniture, things like that. So we got a great response back from everybody. We received equipment lists for specific areas like maintenance, nurses areas, etc. And we took all of that information. We met again internally with the group, reviewed decisions. We also had samples delivered to the school. So we had a nice socially distanced small group meeting with Andrew Barrios, Sarah Horan, Richie Prezzuti, and myself and Chris to review different samples. So student chairs, student desks, mobile storage pieces, teacher desks, and chairs. And we were able to talk through all of those options. Some options were selected right there and then. Teacher chairs were an option that the principal wanted the staff to see. So they were, as they came in to collect items and things, they were able to test the chairs out and vote on which one they liked best. So we really tried to make it a transparent and inclusive process during these unprecedented times. And so with that, what I'm going to present today are samples of the selections that were chosen by the staff and by the school for different areas like classrooms, music areas, areas, administration. I'll show you how we put our documentation together for the state. So we'll be going to Office of School Construction Grants, our review in, let's see, on July 23rd now. And then we'll talk about the costs and where we are overall for cost estimate. So with that, we'll start classroom furniture. Like I said, we had a number of samples delivered to the school. The staff had a lot of input in what kinds of shapes and things that they liked for the desks. The desk selected is called the mini diamond desk. So you can put them together into small groups, put them apart if we need, testing or even for socially distanced classrooms. Four-legged stacking chairs were selected. We have an ADA desk and a number of different storage types depending on the room. So for example, English classrooms get a book truck, math classrooms get a mobile shelving unit, etc. So these are some of the examples of our typical classroom furniture. The science classrooms will have a similar stool, so by the same manufacturer, it'll have the same look, but it's adjustable height. The tables are also adjustable height for those areas with epoxy tops in all the science rooms. And then we have demonstration stations for the teacher. In areas like art, again, same chair, keeping consistent throughout the building, but larger work tables for the students that can be moved around, and different storage types for their specific needs, like paper chart units, drying and damp cabinets for the clay area, and a number of different equipment type items such as slab rollers. In the music area, we worked very closely with Mark on his requests. He had very specific lists, which were excellent to work from. Most of the furniture will be from Wenger, who makes music furniture. And so from anything from posture chairs throughout and stands, there will be choral risers, acoustic shelves for the stage, which are mobile and can be moved out of the way, a lectern for the stage, and then different storage type units for instruments like cello and brass racks and garment racks for the drama program. Going to the CTE furniture tech ed area, again, same type of chairs, stool versions. We'll have a number of different types of tables. So depending on where we're at, if we're in the robotics lab, we'll have tables like the planner table below. In the materials testing lab, we'll have these create tables or big, large work tables with storage below. And then we have computer tables in most of those rooms as well. And then again, storage units. A lot of the storage is fixed, but we also have mobile storage or loose storage like these tote storage for the robotics area. And of course, the teacher furniture, this will be typical throughout. So essentially, whichever classroom you're in will get the same type of furniture. This way, if things have to move down the road or shift around, it'll easily be done as everything looks the same. So the teacher chair was selected by the staff. The one on the left, as you can see, was the winner. The teacher desks have this curved end on them, and that allows for conferencing with students and a little bit more workspace, as well as drawers for their own personal belongings. And then each teacher will have this mobile cart that will have a laptop shelf and doors with totes and storage so that they can work no matter where they are in the room with their laptop or with students. We have a lot of work area in the hub area. So around all of the newly created CTE classrooms, we have furniture outside of those areas for additional workspace. So for example, outside of the science and technology lab or the robotics lab, students will be able to move in and out. It gives them more space to work and areas to test robots or do experiments on. So there will be a number of different types of furniture out there. Some of it matches what's in the classroom. Some of it is large work tables. The students can go in and work on large projects with stools. Some of it will be some more soft seating where they can sit down and maybe study individually, or high top tables and stools. And similarly in public areas as well. So at main entrances to the auditorium, the main entrance into where the main entrance is to the main office, we'll have benches out in the corridors like this wood top fixed bench. We'll also have these curved benches and little seats throughout in hub areas as well as the auditorium lobby. For the administration furniture, we're just showing here the task chair that was selected by the staff. So this will be in the main office and coordinator offices throughout. Guest chairs by the same manufacturer and conference chairs have the same look, just different function. And then you can see the fabrics that were chosen. And those fabrics will coordinate with the different wings as well. So if you're going to the blue wing, you're going to the administrative area there, the furniture there will match and coordinate with that color wing. The desking systems, we worked very closely with Andrew and Sarah on this. They were really excited to look at adjustable height desks for the staff members, so that we all know that sitting all day is not necessarily a good thing. So this portion of the desk can raise and lower very easily. And it has an attached work surface rail so that they have some storage space. There's also storage underneath, so locking drawers and file areas. And all of the offices will receive this, what we call a multi-storage unit. So it has a wardrobe on one side, storage with fixed shelves, and additional files below. And this furniture is the same type of furniture that's actually at Enfield High School in the main office. Different configuration, different finishes, but a very similar concept that was done there. Last but not least, we'll just talk about cafeteria. So the cafeteria furniture will have attached stools to the main tables throughout. This is called elliptical shaped table. And there are also some high top tables with some stools in those areas as well, but primarily the folding tables that can be moved out of the way for different functions within the space. So before I move on, does anybody have any questions?
Walter, I have a question.
Go ahead, Mr. Salazar.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised that there is no consideration for the situation that we're living in, and I think it's pretty optimistic and ambitious to believe that we're never going to be hit with a situation like we're living today, where social distancing is the norm. I did not see anything regarding options at least being considered for the classroom for students, and even the table that we're looking at here where we have, seating almost shoulder to shoulder. Is there no consideration being given that we may face a situation where we are now again in the future?
Well, a lot of this furniture isn't going to be installed until next year, so it's not an immediate consideration at this point. I think the idea of the whole team was that, looking towards the long term, part of the decision to go with individual desks within the classroom is just so that you can move those apart and set them apart. You would never be able to fit as many, but the idea is to think long term. That we don't know what's going to happen, right?
Right.
But there are options that can be considered when it comes to that time. So, for example, the cafeteria tables won't be needed for at least another year. Students can sit every other spot, and there are options to provide like acrylic dividers on those tables in all of those areas. But at this point, to buy those now when these items, if these items were needed for the fall, then I think there would have been a lot more conversation about it. Because it's needed down the road, we can look at those types of options down the road if this continues on. Randy, I don't know if you want to talk.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to chime in, Bill. One thing too, we have restrictions and guidelines that we have to design by. One of them is specific the amount of children in classrooms. We would love to design a classroom to have 16 or 12 kids in there, and but that's not what the state, we're required to have 23 to 25 kids in the classroom, and that's how reimbursements are done. As far as the cafeteria, again, we have specific guidelines based on how many shifts of cafeteria students are going to be in there. This is hopefully a temporary thing. If not, then the state has to change its regulations to allow us to do it. But as of right now, in order to get full reimbursement, we have to design it based on the state criteria and their regulations.
Yeah, my question was more to the point is, do any of these furniture items that are being considered or selected, do they have the ability or the option to have other types of installations?
Yes, they all do.
I think there was the mention that there were acrylic, plexiglass, whatever they're called. I believe that I'm not talking about you have to fit only 6 desks or 10 desks, but even the desks that are selected, do they have the ability to have easily applied, or whatever the right word is, built in, or have these partitions, divisions in the future? And I assume and hope, like everybody here does, I'm sure, is like we will have a vaccine within the next 12 months or so. But what if the worst case happens and we don't? What if we have another pandemic, right? This is the first one of many that were expected. This was anticipated 12 years ago, and people are talking about this is the beginning of many to come. So I think I'm not saying that we should purchase the furniture with the partitions built in, but I am saying that furniture that is considered should take into account how easily can it be retrofitted with the acrylic or plexiglass or whatever is called partitions, independent of how many desks you're going to place in the classroom.
They all can be outfitted with something like that. And again, that's why when we designed the classrooms, we have them the capability of being next to each other, or if this continues, we could spread them out. And the teachers can move around. Nothing's locked in place. The cafeteria, same thing. We have a bunch of high tops if we want to make them individually. We're also, when we designed this and we got the direction, they didn't want to isolate children. They didn't want to have all these small high tops and have them being bullied or not be able to be with the crowd or the rest of the class. So the direction that we were given at the early on was just keep these kids together as a class. You don't want to have 100 small tables where all these kids are sitting by themselves. So the direction from the state and the direction from the town was, let's do as many of these solo communication tables as we possibly can, keep the kids together, keep the classes together, so when the teachers are in there, they know where their classrooms are. They're not spread out throughout this entire wing. So, we've been fighting both directions here. We're trying to accommodate both, but I think JCJ did a great job. With these tables here, they have the capability, if we need to put some plastic dividers, they can be purchased and put in there. Again, we have the high top tables. If they want to move the kids around a little bit, to have separation, they can do that. The classroom's the same way, like I just spoke of. So yeah, I mean, it came at the last inning of the ball game, but they did a hell of a job to accommodate these, because these weren't the tables and these weren't the chairs that were initially selected 2-3 months ago. So they did take all that into consideration with this new world that we're going to be in. So.
Well, I raised the issue and you're addressing it. What you're telling me is that the furniture that's been selected, in fact, has the capability or the ability to be easily adopted into not only a configuration sense, but that there could be additional partitions, plexiglass, whatever it is, that could be assembled onto it if needed. And that's what I was asking. Was any consideration given to that? Because none of that was in the presentation. So I appreciate the clarification. But yes, I think that part of the design should have that consideration, because we cannot afford to just be very optimistic and hope that things are going to go our way, and then we have an expense in the millions and we find ourselves, we can't set kids here anymore, right? That would be short-sighted on everybody's part. So absolutely. I think you're addressing my question, but it wasn't in the presentation.
So just so you know that most of the furniture manufacturers now are all making some variation of the plexiglass or any kind of divider that will work for this type of situation. And they're all customizable, and they're all, they work with the systems and the desking. So if we do get to that point, we can easily modify that and make that work throughout all of the classroom and cafeteria spaces.
Great, thank you.
Walter, can I ask something?
Yes, Mr. LeBlanc.
How about as far as auditorium seating and the gym and locker rooms? Anything along those lines yet?
Well, the auditorium has to be fixed seating because you have means of egresses, you have aisles, you have handicap areas. So that is, we're required to meet the maximum occupancy load, and we're required by code to have the seating pretty much fixed in place. So what we're going to have to do, if the schools need to, they're going to have to alternate seats or rows, but we can't design fixtures that are permanently fixed in there for a temporary situation. So,
well, I'm not necessarily talking COVID related. I'm just talking the furniture that was being, like the bleachers inside the gymnasium or the locker room materials or the auditorium seating itself, regardless of COVID or not.
oh, I get you. I'm sorry, I thought we were still on that. This is called FF&E, furniture, finishes, and equipment. That is more of a permanent type fixtures. So that would be at another presentation, I believe.
Those are part of the construction documents, so they're already bid. So auditorium seating, the bleachers, the lockers, benches in the locker rooms, those were all part of the construction package that's already been bid out.
We could present those. We've been trying to be able to do a full-blown presentation for the town. But like we did at the high school, we wanted to periodically keep everybody informed and have a question and answer period. But when this thing came out, we had to start construction before we can do a public presentation. But those are pretty much, they're similar to what we did at the high school as far as the quality and the logos and the colors and stuff. But we can gather another presentation. I know we don't need to bring that to a vote, but just to again, be as transparent as we possibly can. We can do another little presentation on our next update to you guys and show you all of that stuff. With the paint colors, the ceiling colors, the tile colors, stuff like that. We can, like I said, we were hoping to do a full-blown presentation for you guys and the public, but it just didn't work out.
Understandable. Thank you.
Good question, though. Thank you.
Any other questions? I don't see any hands or anything, so.
Okay, I'll keep going.
All right, go ahead, Emily.
Thank you. So with that, all of the items, and there's well over 200 items that are actually being specified for the project, including all of the equipment pieces, the loose pieces. Every item gets what's called an item number and item data sheet. This will go to the state. So this is an example of one of how we specify all of the information with the model numbers, the sizes, the finishes, any kind of special details or information that's required, as well as quantities and room locations. And so we have actively been working on this, and this is what we will be, a portion of what the project manual looks like, specifications that will be sent to go to the state, as well as furniture drawings. So as we did with the construction, there's also furniture plans. These are all updated with the correct quantities and then labeled and tagged, as well as notes where the ADA stations are. And the state will review these in review with the project manual to make sure that everything's in place and everything is specified correctly.
And one of the things, not only does the furniture drawings show the exact location, but it reassures the state. The state won't buy if we have a classroom and they're allocating 26 students, they will not reimburse the coverage of 27 tables. So they literally have to account, and that's what that spreadsheet there that we just had shows every classroom that that table is going to be used at. And then it also has to coincide with the drawings in order to get the reimbursement from the state. So the state is really picky. It's not like we can buy excess inventory, hoping that, you know, if anything happens on the road, we have 20 desks left over, but they don't do that. They won't pay for one desk greater than the class occupancy load.
Correct. And that's a great transition to the cost estimate. So what we've done is we break down by category the eligible costs column as well as ineligible costs. The state is very prescriptive about what they will pay for and what they will not pay for. So when you see numbers in the ineligible costs, those are items such as choral risers. They just will not purchase choral risers, although that is integral into the music department program. So it's still needed by the school. It's still needed as part of the program. We're still including it. We just break it out so that it's as though it's, you know, in the ineligible column. Another example is fitness equipment. They don't pay for or reimburse for fitness equipment, but new fitness equipment is required, you know, for the cardio room that is being done. So that's essentially the breakdown. You can see the costs at the bottom. Eligible costs are approximately $1.9 million. Ineligibles, just under 400, with a grand total of 2.28 roughly. So on that, does anybody have any questions?
Ms. Costa, go ahead.
Yeah, I have two questions. So I understand things like, you know, physical fitness equipment, music equipment not being eligible. But for like the cases of classroom furniture, what are those components that are ineligible?
So the components are that when the ed specs went out, there is a list of 25 students per classroom. However, we know from working with Andrew and the school that in a lot of the classes range from 24 to 29 in every classroom. So in order to meet those needs, additional desks are required in the classrooms. And so those additional desks and chairs, as well as like science tables, a couple extra science tables in those classrooms, those are listed as ineligible because even though they're required to meet those numbers, the state again is they're very strict about looking at, oh, well, you know, it says 25 students. Well, yes, but in reality, there's going to be more students within classrooms. So that's why you see furniture in like the classroom furniture category as ineligible.
You know,
go ahead,
Wendy, the state even gets to the point where, like in an auditorium, they only pay 50%. They reimburse for the seats because they also think that the public can use it. Or the gymnasium, the bleachers, they only give 50% because the town can use it for other things. So they get right down to the nitty gritty on some of these things. And you know, you think that since they require it, they would cover it. But as you know, sometimes it doesn't work that way. So
they're protecting my tax dollars, Randy. Come on. My second question is how this compares to what we had put in as an estimate when we were going for referendum.
The total FF&E budget you're referring to?
Correct.
We are under it.
By, or aren't we sharing?
I think, do we have that other sheet? I think it's at least a couple 100,000.
It is, yeah. It's approximately, I think, 300,000, if I remember correctly. Chris can.
Right. Yeah,
I won't hold you to the exact dollar.
We were projecting about 2.8 million, so we're 2.3. So what's that? $500,000 under.
Oh, even better.
I have a quick question for Randy.
Go ahead, Mr. Ryder.
Is the FF&E reimbursable at the same rate as the construction project itself, that 70.17, et cetera?
Yes.
Yes, it is. Whatever's eligible is also at that rate. Yes.
Thank you.
Great question, Scott.
All right. speak up, anybody else, because I don't have everybody on my screen, so.
I have a question, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead,
Salazar.
Mr. Salzar.
I'm curious on the administration seating. What is that line item? What does that entail?
So if you recall, a portion of the building, which is where the current main office and media center are technically not a reimbursed area because it was completed, I guess, Randy, correct me if I'm wrong, when the project went through, it was technically under 20 years. So that one small portion of the building is not reimbursed. Because it's being reconfigured in one of those areas to now become coordinators' offices, we're still buying new furniture, so desks and chairs and conference room furniture for that area, but it's technically deemed ineligible.
Yeah,
Same with the media center.
right. The media center in that addition were done. The state will not reimburse anything under 20 years old, and this is at 18 years old. So we were basically not going to be able to do too much stuff in there. But we were able to convince them, because we're using the media center as swing space, that we can make that eligible now. So there's just the actual administration area isn't totally eligible, but we are going to be making it refresher, cleaning it up, and painting it and stuff like that. But that's minor compared to everything else. But that's why that area was not deemed eligible for reimbursement.
I appreciate that information, but I didn't explain my question, I guess. I was wondering, in the current slide, there's a category B, which is administration seating. And what I was asking is, what comprises administration seating?
Oh, it's all of the task chairs, guest chairs, conference room chairs. I believe there's a few other items in there, but that's primarily what that is.
Okay.
And Bill, if you want to know, the existing cafeteria, when it's done with swing space, will end up being the new administrative area, and that's where all that furniture will go into.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Speak up. All right, I think we're all set. Randy, you want to add anything else before we?
Yeah, like I said, we really truly wanted to do a full-blown presentation of the floor plan, the exterior elevation, the site, everything, but this does not allow us. I know the liaisons are doing a hell of a job bringing back as much information as possible to you guys and to the town council, but one saving grace we are right now, we are literally ahead of schedule. Luckily and sadly, but we were able to close the school early and get permission from the state to start early. And when this went out to bid, the bids were incredibly favorable. So we are close to $5 million right now under budget on the project. So we're in good shape. We've been working hand in hand with Chris, with Andy, with Andrew, everybody. They've been on a drop of a dime being responsive and answering questions for us. We have not waited long for any type of answer. So the correspondence and the communication is unbelievable. And it's really made a difference in this project being what it is, ahead of schedule and on a budget right now. So I commend everybody that's involved in it.
Well, we got to thank you too, Randy, for your great chairmanship and keeping everybody in order. So I want to, before we lose them, I want to suspend the rules and take number 7A. So I want a motion to suspend the rules and take 7A. Do I have a motion? Moved by Ms. Hall.
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Costa. Any discussion? All in favor, just say aye.
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 So 7A, discussion and vote Phase 2 furniture plans, specification and cost estimate to be submitted to OSCG for review and approval and sign off on Form SCG-042. Do I have a motion for this vote?
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Thurston. Seconded by Ms. Costa. Any other discussion? Could we have a roll call, please?
Mr. LeBlanc,
4,
Mr. Salazar,
4,
Mr. Rutledge,
4,
Mrs. Costa,
4,
Mrs. LeBlanc,
Yes.
Mrs. Hall,
Yes.
Mrs. Thurston,
yes,
Mr. Ryder,
Yes.
Chairman Cruzel.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you again, and thank you, Emily and Chris and Randy, and just keep up the good work and stay safe, and we'll have another, if we want, we'll have another presentation, maybe September, October, hopefully live in person. So,
Great.
Thank you.
and if
Thank
you
you
guys
all.
want, you can just dump out of the meeting. You don't need to hang around. So,
Okay. Thank you, guys.
thank
Have a
you.
great
Have a
night.
good night.
Good seeing you all.
Have a good night.
Good
Thank
seeing
you.
you too. Good night, Chris.
Bye.
All right, so back up to number 5, superintendent's report. Mr. Dresser.
I'm going to apologize in advance to Ms. Thurston because I know how much she really adores lengthy superintendent's reports, but given the circumstances, this one might take a little longer than normal. But it's all on one topic, and that's obviously with the reopening update and where we are thus far. Since we've met last, I know a lot of you are aware that the governor made a broad set announcement that he has a state plan to reopen all Connecticut schools for in-person classes in September. That press conference was preceded by an announcement that all superintendents would receive a 50-page document that outlines the guidelines for us to actually be in a position to open schools in person in September. I did receive those guidelines, and shortly after I received the guidelines, I did send out a communication home to all families. I did so. I know some of my other counterparts wanted to get ahead of it and send it out the same day of the press conference. And I made the decision that I was going to hold off on sending it until I actually had an opportunity to see the facts as far as what the requirements would be. So we did do it in that manner. As part of the guidelines, and I'll get into some specifics in a moment, but in a nutshell, we have until July 24th to submit to the state of Connecticut 3 plans to reopen. And those 3 plans have to be one of the following: a plan for in-person in September when kids return, a plan for a hybrid approach, and I'll talk about that in a moment, and then another plan in the event we have to go all digital again like we have over the last several months. For those of you who have seen the report, I have shared it with the board. The report is, the guidelines, I should say, the 50-page famous document is actually on our website as well. It's a little bit of false advertising. It's actually a lot longer than 50 pages. It's 50 pages on its surface, but if you actually drill down on some of the links inside the document, it leads you to more requirements that we have to fulfill when it comes to things like buildings and grounds and ventilation systems. So it's all in total, it's about 150 pages. So anyone who's interested in reading, you can certainly fact check me on anything I'm about to share, but it's all out there for the public to see. I also want to inform the board and the public that I've spoken at length over the last few days, not only with counterparts, the Commissioner of Education, but also at length with Board Legal Counsel, which was one of the recommendations from the Commissioner's office on a call yesterday for us to run by any questions or concerns we may have with the reopening guidelines through our legal counsel, because there's a lot of questions. And I don't want to quote an individual, but I'll say from the board's counsel, and I quote, "There are more questions than answers at this point when it comes to this plan." I'm not going to be the bearer of all the bad news, but just hold on for a minute. One of the requirements in the plans that's a little different than what we're traditionally used to are that parents now have options when it comes to sending their children back to school. And the first option is parents can send, if we're open, they can send their kids back like they would. You know, obviously it's going to look a little different, but they have the option to send their kids back to school in a traditional sense like we always do. Another option, which is new, is parents now have what's called an opt-out option. And the opt-out is a little bit different than what we're traditionally used to in the public school system. Traditionally, if a parent was to opt out of school, they would withdraw their child and engage in homeschooling, which means they have to send a document to me. I have to approve it. We have to look at the plan that they're going to use for their child. And then we sign off on whether or not we're going to let that parent essentially homeschool their child. And at that point, the obligation on behalf of the school system is none. because that parent opts out of their child, they decide to homeschool their child, there is no longer an obligation for the Enfield Public Schools, in our case, to provide any instruction or materials for those kids. Now, those families still have the option to shadow certain things or get materials, but as far as us actually delivering instruction to those children who homeschool, there is no obligation on behalf of the board. That has all changed. And the way that the guidelines are developed as we speak, if a parent chooses to opt out of attending traditional classes in this fall, they also have the option to continue with the digital learning experience. The problem with that, under that option, is the digital learning experience that's referenced in the document is not defined. So if you recall, over the past few months, the entire district was closed. Everyone was forced to adhere to our digital learning plan. It is unclear at this point that not if we're all going all digital in the fall, but for those children who choose to not attend school for whatever reason, it's understandable. If the parent decides to keep their child home and opt into a digital learning plan, there are no set directions to districts at this point as to what that digital learning plan has to entail. It doesn't necessarily have to be what we've done in the past. It doesn't necessarily have to be an enhanced plan at this point in time to what we're planning to do if we're forced to go all digital again. It's a very gray area at this point in time. And this came directly from a board's legal counsel that said, we can't give you any advice on what to produce for those families at this point in time because we still have several inquiries into the state as to what that requirement would look like. And then, but the two options essentially for parents at this point are send their child back to school in traditional sense, opt out and continue with digital learning, or parents still have that option to opt out altogether and homeschool their child. It's in the same way that we would traditionally deal with children who are going to be homeschooled. I want to just give you some brief overviews as to what we're doing thus far, and then I'm going to take a pause to really hone in on one particular area. But as what the guidelines are, there's a second set of requirements that we have to adhere to. In addition to sending out our plan, which I shared with the board over the past hour, one of the concerns that came up on the conversation with the commissioner's office was, what do you want it to look like? And there was a lot of contention as far as 169 towns submitting 169 different plans. So one of the requests were that what we actually submit by July 24th should be a fill-in document. So the state would send us a document and we would simply fill in the different areas that that would match up with our plan. The fill-in document was sent to us in the last hour or so. I did forward it to the board and members of the Reopen Committee, but I do so with the caveat that at the same time I received it, board legal counsel received it at the same time as well, and cautioned us on doing anything too quickly until they had an opportunity to review it. I say that because when the guidelines came out, we all received it at the same time, including lawyers. So it took everybody's legal counsel about a week to really digest what was in these guidelines. And to be quite honest, there are some things in the guidelines that are questionable as to the legality if we were to actually enhance them. So this is a concurrent conversation that we're not only having with our partners at the state, we're obviously going to need to involve partners at the town level, but more importantly, we need to make sure that what we do doesn't hold the board liable for anything that might not necessarily be, for lack of a better term, legal in some of the way the guidelines came out. Although there was an attorney on the original committee that drafted them, that was the State Department of Education's attorney. That's not your attorney. Our attorney wants us, before we do anything, to make sure we're keeping everything copacetic in line. But the two things that we're able to begin with that were required is the first step that we're required to do is to send a survey to all of our staff. And again, this is a survey that has to be approved through the EEOC to make sure that we're not being discriminatory in any way, shape, or form. And all of our employees in the Enfield Public Schools have received today a survey asking the simple question, if school were to return in person, do you plan on returning to work? And there's a number of scenarios that fall under a category, but the survey is simply one question, yes or no. And if you're unable to return to work for any of the reasons outlined, please check off no or please check off yes. The question I have on that survey is, what do we do with the information if everyone replies back no, and we have no one showing up? Part of the conversation today with legal counsel was, we're not there yet. You have to send the survey, you have to ask the question. Once you compile the data, we'll give you more guidance as to what to do with it, because then we're going to start getting into questions in the labor area. We're going to start getting into questions when it comes to leave, collective bargaining. There's a lot of other tentacles to this beyond just, are you coming to work? But that survey has been sent. This part is extremely important. Tomorrow, every parent in the district is going to get a survey from us. And the survey is going to ask several specific questions. It's going to ask your child's name. How many, if you have more than one child, we have to ask you to please fill out a survey for each child. It's going to ask what school your child attends, what grade they're anticipating going in. And most importantly, we have to ask parents, if we have in-person classes in September, do you intend on sending your child to school? Another question that we have to ask on the survey is, in the event you are planning on sending your child to school, will you, and your child is eligible for transportation, will you be taking advantage of transportation? Because before we can do any of our planning, although we've already begun, and I will fill you in that in a moment, we're really, the goalposts will continue to move, because as we can plan for in-person classes, we don't know how many students to expect to physically show up on the first day of school. It's a lot easier, or easier is probably not the best word. It changes the dynamics of our planning based on the capacity we have to plan for. Now, all signs and surveys thus far indicated that districts should anticipate 35 to 40% of families opting out of in-person classes. When we start getting into the weeds of space and social distancing and where we're going to be putting desks and traffic flows, 60% of our capacity is a much different thing to plan for than 100% capacity. So the very first two steps in this process are the survey to staff, which is already going out, and the survey to everyone else, which is going out tomorrow. I can't implore all of you enough to encourage anyone you know, if you have children of your own, if you have friends of your own that have children. If I am not on social media, admittedly so, it's not the first time I've said that, but those of you who are active, I would implore all of you to please encourage any member of the Anfield Public Schools family that is in receipt of this survey to please, please, please complete it. Unfortunately, there's a tight deadline for families to complete it. Another component of the survey tomorrow, we have to ask it again, is what are parents' internet capabilities in their home? Do you have reliable Wi-Fi in your homes? And the difference between now and the last time we asked that question was, we are now in a position where we can better suit those families who don't have a strong internet connection with things such as hotspots. The challenge that we have is making sure we identify those families who don't have reliable Wi-Fi in their homes. So we had to juggle how many questions we asked, because we don't want to dilute the survey, and people are less inclined at times to fill a long survey out. But this is very critical information that we're going to ask of families. I've had conversations with our teachers union that are going to promote this. We're going to promote this through every avenue that we have, beginning tomorrow. But I needed to get the staff survey out prior to the parent survey going out tomorrow. I'll probably recircle to that in a moment, but I want to just take a quick opportunity not to address the 9 of you as board members, but for any parents who are listening out in ETV land, YouTube, if you're going to rewatch this, if you're listening, or if you're streaming this somewhere. Speaking as a parent myself, I have an obligation to be 100% honest and upfront with parents. I've always prided myself on doing that, and I'm not going to let the current situation change it. That said, what we're asking parents on July 7th to make a decision if you're going to send your child to school when we will realistically still be in the midst of a pandemic 2 months from now, without knowing what school is going to look like, is an unthinkable challenge that we're asking parents. And I understand that, because I have 2 children of my own that I had to fill out. Tomorrow I have to fill out the very same survey. So I want to be as upfront with parents as I can. I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but as I said earlier, it's hard to tell a parent, are you going to send your child to school in September, when I can't sit here and definitively tell you what it's going to look like. But the reality is, I can't definitively tell you what it's going to look like. The truth is we just don't know. I will share with you what I know now. And one thing I am certain of is that school is not going to look like anything any of us have ever experienced in our life if we are permitted to return to in-person classes in September. I will start with fact. I don't want to speculate on what things are going to look like. I will tell you that a lot of the conversation that I've been having with colleagues and folks around the state and with attorneys is that a lot of the guidelines anticipate changes because a lot of it was sent out relatively quickly and there hadn't been a lot of pushback when it was originally put out. But there's a few things that I know definitively at this moment. So I'm not going to speculate on what things will look like. I only want to share with you facts. The first fact is that if you're going to send your child to school, it is not negotiable that your child will be required to wear a mask at all times while they are in the building. I know, particularly for those of you who have younger children at home, the idea of your son or daughter wearing a mask for 6.5 hours in a school building that doesn't necessarily have air conditioning is a challenge and can create anxiety for you and for your child. I 100% totally understand that. However, the commissioner made it very clear yesterday, although we are often compared to our neighbors to the north in Massachusetts, where the State Department of Ed and Mass made their guidelines that only grades 2 and higher would be required to wear masks. In the state of Connecticut, it is not negotiable. Masks will be required at all times in our school buildings by students and by staff. And in the rare case there's a visitor, although visitors aren't permitted, but if someone has to come into the building to retrieve a child, you will be wearing a mask. What's not clear in the guidelines beyond everyone has to wear a mask is where we're going to get them. So although it says masks should be provided, it doesn't say they must be. So I've made a decision working with one of our vendors that we've purchased 10,000 masks for the Enfield Public Schools. So every one of our students, every one of our staff members, and anyone who works in the district will be provided a cloth mask that was approved through one of our vendors. We don't have the liberty of waiting to find out if the state is going to provide us with masks. I've asked the question 3 times. I've yet to get a straight answer. We've got 3 weeks to figure this out, and I can't wait any longer because, like the toilet paper saga of 3 months ago, although there's a lot of vendors out there who claim they work, and sell PPE, getting our hands on masks and getting them in time for prior to school starting, because we have to distribute them, we don't have the luxury of waiting. So we've ordered masks for all of our students. If something changes and we don't have to use them, you know what? Then they'll become mementos. But at this point, we need to make a decision to move forward with masks because the commissioner was very clear everyone is going to be wearing a mask. In addition to masks, teachers are required to wear masks. Teachers are permitted to move their masks down when they're giving instruction, as long as they are socially distanced away from their kids. So this is important for parents to know. Your teacher may pull their mask down, but they're required to be 6 feet away from kids when delivering instruction. And we'll talk about what instruction is going to look like in a moment. But as an extra set of precautions, and to be fair, to try to protect the health and safety of our teachers, we're also ordering face shields for all of our staff. So in the event they have to pull their mask down, because remember, a lot of our younger kids, they learn by watching the movements of their teachers' mouths. And I've had conversations with elementary teachers saying, how am I going to deliver instruction with my face covered? So it's incumbent upon us to give our teachers the best options they can to make sure they can do the best they can when they're there. So right now, our nurse supervisor has applied for a grant through the Ford Motor Company to try to obtain 6,000 face shields. In the event we're unsuccessful, we have an order on standby, but at a minimum, those are the protections we have to put in place for our staff and for our kids. When it comes to social distancing, a lot of people, I understand, are not going to read a 50 to 150 page document. People are used to social distancing. They're used to 6 feet. I don't want any parent to have this misunderstanding that by coming to school, there's a guarantee that your son or daughter is going to be 6 feet away from every person in that school throughout your entire experience of the day. If you read the guidelines, 6 feet of social distancing in classrooms are requested if feasible, not required. The directive we were given yesterday was, if it's feasible to keep kids 6 feet separated while they're in classrooms, certainly do it. But the expectation is 3 feet. So what, and I'll get into what we're doing in a moment, but I don't want parents to say, well, I'm going to send my kid to school because they're not going to be within 6 feet of another person the entire day. The reality is that's just not feasible. And I don't want anyone to have a false pretense that, you know, come September, their child comes home and says, I was 3 feet away from my classmate today, and anyone to come back to us and say, well, you didn't tell us that was going to happen. This is what the reality that we're living in. I don't like it. I'm not advocating for it, but these are the rules that we're given. But again, another one of the misconceptions are that, and I'll get into classrooms again, the guidelines for the classrooms right now are 3 feet. Traditional classrooms of what we've been used to over the last several years, and it was ironic that we had a presentation today on putting classrooms together and kids working collaboratively and working in small groups, that's all gone for the foreseeable future. Classrooms are going to look more like what all of us except Jonathan remember from being in elementary school than what we're traditionally used to seeing over the last 10 years. Classrooms are going to consist of desks and a teacher in the front of the room. And it's heartbreaking because I go into the classrooms and I sit on the rugs and read to kids. That's all got to go. That doesn't confine to what the guidelines are. So what classrooms look like and what instruction looks like is going to be unrecognizable to most of us as we go through this process if we want to get our kids back in person in September. Desks facing forward, that's a requirement. Kids facing each other, not happening anytime in the foreseeable future. Teacher in front of the classroom, again, they have the ability to pull their mask down while they're delivering instruction, but as an extra set of precaution, we're going to provide them with face shields because teachers have to worry about their health and well-being as well. You're hearing a lot, I'm sure, about busing. In the requirements, it says that buses can operate on near capacity. That's all we know. We don't know what near capacity means. Neither do every education lawyer in the state of Connecticut and or essentially the lawyer for the state of Connecticut, because the question was asked and the only definitive answers we were given were that you could run buses. Masks are still required on buses. Prior to getting on a bus, your student is going to be at the bus stop with their mask on. Bus drivers are not going to be responsible for monitoring who's wearing masks on buses. So therefore, the district is going to have to provide bus monitors to act as the mask police because the bus driver has a responsibility to drive the bus safely and not turn around the entire time and make sure a bunch of kindergartners have their masks on. I say that because in theory it sounds, okay, well that's easy. We'll just hire bus monitors to make sure that we're putting masks on kids or the kids are keeping their masks on. If you're not familiar with the district and you're just watching this at home, it sounds like an easy fix outside of the financial burden that it puts on the district. What you don't realize is that throughout the course of just this past year, we have bus monitors for all of our kids at Stowe. And every day, with the exception of 2, I believe, and I'm sure Ms. Valley or Andy can attest to this, we've had to pull staff from the building to serve as bus monitors because, quite frankly, we can't hire enough, and these aren't jobs that people are necessarily striving for. So trying to find bus monitors when life is normal has been a significant challenge for us. Now that it's going to be required is going to be a greater challenge for us. But again, if this is what we have to do to get kids back in school safely, we're going to do everything we can. But I just think it's important for parents to know you're going to see another adult on the bus, and they're going to be making sure that your child wears that mask while they're on the bus. No matter the temperature, that mask has to stay on. You're also probably hearing a lot about cohorting. And I want parents to really understand what cohorting is. In theory, what cohorting would be was a student gets to school, however it is they get there. If they're in kindergarten at Enfield Street School, and in case Mrs. Holovich is watching, I'll use her as an example. Cohorting is you're going to go into Mrs. Holovich's class, you're going to be with your other 10, 12, however many classmates you have, and you're going to be isolated with those kids for the entirety of your day. And in theory, that makes a lot of sense because in the event there is an outbreak, contact tracing is a lot easier to identify where those kids are. You can also identify, you can also isolate any staff members that may have come in contact with those students. What I can't guarantee for families, if a parent is thinking, okay, well, if I'm sending my kid to kindergarten, they're only going to be with their classmates. And I know who most of those kids are, so I'm comfortable with that. And these are conversations I have in my home as well. What I can't promise you is once you leave that cohort, you're still getting on a bus with every other kid in that school. And in our case, if you're, a kindergarten student at Enfield Street School, in all likelihood, you'll also be on that bus with students from Parkman because of our sister school concept and our tiered busing. So in theory, it sounds great that we're going to cohort everyone and we're going to do everything we can to do it. But I don't want there to be a misconception that my kindergarten student is only going to be exposed to the kids in his or her class for the entire day. That's it. That's just not realistically what would happen. And I want to make sure I'm upfront and truthful about that. The other thing I mentioned about the survey is the internet capability. I can't harp that enough on why we need to know, because whatever our plan is, and as I said earlier, there are 3 plans we have to submit. There is going to be a digital component to this in some capacity. We're waiting for direction on what that opt-out digital component capacity will be. But we do know that there will be an increased measure of digital learning at some point throughout this process. One of the things that was shared with us yesterday was expect this to be with us for the next 12 months. Hopefully our numbers don't continue the way they are throughout the rest of the country, but the reality is we have to plan to operate as if the world of a pandemic is going to be with us throughout the duration of next school year. And if we're pleasantly surprised that it exits us prior to that, that's great. But so that's why it's extremely important for us to make sure that we have the information available to us so that families that do need some assistance when it comes to internet capability in their homes, because the reality is come flu season, you all may get a call at 5:30 in the morning and says, we're closed, turn your devices on, we're digital learning. So we need to do as much preparation work now as we can in the event we're in that situation. So that was just, I wanted to take this opportunity to have a conversation with parents because I know a lot of parents have millions of questions about this stuff. I do as well. That's what I can share with you at the moment because those are the definitive facts that have been shared with me. What we've been doing thus far, and I know there might be some misconception out there. It's summer, we're all taking the time off. Well, that's not happening. There's been a lot of work that's been going on behind the scenes, even prior to us getting these guidelines out. Now that we know what the requirements are, we can expedite some of our conversations more. But as we speak, we've got staff members in school buildings right now literally measuring classrooms. Because before we can determine how many kids we can fit in a classroom, our goal is to take a 36 square foot radius around every desk. So at a minimum, whatever child we put in that classroom has 36 square feet around them so that they don't have to interact with any of their classmates. We're not going to be able to keep kids 6 feet apart when they're at desks. But like I said earlier, our classrooms are going to look like they used to look when we all went to elementary school, where there's going to be rows of desks, minimally 3 feet away, greater if we can, and a teacher driving instruction at the front of the classroom. We have pressed the button on moving forth with our digital professional development. That's not just for staff members. But we know we have an obligation to train not just staff, but students, and just as importantly, parents. As I mentioned at our last meeting, we've procured iPads for every student in the district. We're in the process of getting a distribution plan, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, to make sure that we can deliver them to all. But we have an obligation to show everybody how to use them. And that doesn't just mean staff. That means parents, because they're going to be the first troubleshooter when they get in their house. That also means kids. Our curriculum department is already in the process of taping professional development that we're going to be able to put out in all of our different mediums before kids get back to school, so people can utilize time over the summer to familiarize themselves with the devices, with the materials, and with the programs. We conduct meetings on Teams. We know that Teams has a lot more capabilities than what we used this past spring. Teams will do a lot of things that we didn't realize at the time the capabilities they had, including, but not limited to, students actually submitting work through Teams to their teachers and getting feedback. That is already in process in the planning and the development through our curriculum staff and through our administrative staff who are working on that, and our coordinators is going on as we speak with the hopes of getting that information live as quickly as possible. I mentioned earlier about the iPad distribution. Guy hasn't slept in about 2 weeks, but we're working on it, and we know we're going to get them out as soon as we can. Our curriculum department, as I said earlier, our whole world is turned upside down. Not just that the world has changed, but the way we deliver instruction and the way that we've put all of our resources over the last decade into changing instruction, into things like executive function, into things just for a second. Imagine the play lab at Stowe that we're so proud of. Can't do it anymore. So we have to rewrite and rethink the way that we're going to instruct all of our teachers to deliver instruction if kids are able to come back in person under this environment. So our curriculum department has been working overtime, trying to refocus all of our efforts to make sure that we're very clear and concise with staff and with parents and with kids on what instruction is going to look like if we're able to return. There's also things that people don't necessarily think about, but we're creating flowcharts because walking around a building the way we're used to it isn't going to be the way we're able to do that anymore. If anyone has been through a grocery store and has looked at the arrows on the ground, it's going to look very similar with us. We've got to go through, but we're not permitted to just do that in a vacuum. We have things like fire marshals we have to run these things by. We have capacity issues that we have to run these things by. All those plans are in place and are starting to be developed as we speak. Pick up and drop off. One of the questions on the survey to parents is going to be, if you are going to send your child back to school, are you going to use our transportation? And we're anticipating a lot of parents saying, if we're going to permit our child to come back, we're going to drive them ourselves. Has anyone ever been to pick up or drop off at Enfield Street School in normal times? It's horrendous. Now multiply that times 4. That's what we need to anticipate. And we can't do that alone. We have to utilize our resources and our friends at the police department, the traffic division, to make sure that as we're coming up with this new way of pick up and drop off, that we're getting the okay from public safety to do so. Those plans are starting to be developed. Well, as I said earlier, we couldn't push the button on a lot of this stuff until we knew what the rules were. I mentioned earlier, and I keep saying that online is going to be a part of what we do. I can't sit here today and tell you definitively what it's going to look like, but that's not because of choice. That's because of what the guidelines that were given and the lack of clarity in some of them. But I've heard a lot of examples, and it's great that people are giving feedback. And I heard one, and I'll admit where I heard it from. I heard it from my wife. So she's hopefully not watching. She's going to be mad at me for saying it. She said, well, why don't you just do live stream classes? So if 10 kids show up and the other 10 kids are at home, you live stream the teacher, and if they have an iPad, they can go on Teams and watch it. And that way, every child is getting the same instruction. Well, in theory, that sounds like a great idea. But what you guys pay us to figure out is that legal? Can we do that? Are there labor issues? I will tell you right now, there are. There are a lot of requirements. Right now, we just can't go into a classroom and videotape a teacher giving instruction. And there's a lot of reasons for that. There are labor issues for that. There are confidentiality issues for that. If there are other kids in the classroom, some kids can't be on camera. There are FERPA violations that we have to be careful for. So it sounds like a great idea, and it sounds like the easiest fix. We're in the process of trying to figure out a way to do that where it still fits in the confines of what we're allowed to do legally. And all of those things are under consideration. I know it's been long, but I just want to end with 2 quick things. I can't stress enough to anyone watching, and I speak for Andy on this as well, because we talk about this every day. We want nothing more than our kids to be back in school. And we know we speak on behalf of our staff. Our staff wants nothing more for our kids to be back in school. But I have to add this. We need everyone to be safe. And we need to make sure that we're doing everything possible to ensure that we're following the guidelines, that we're making a good faith effort. You're going to hear a lot about that, because in the event something goes wrong, we have to make sure that we're protecting everybody involved. So we are going to do everything we can, if we're permitted, to get our kids back into school, but we're not going to do it by jeopardizing the health and safety of anyone, students, staff, family members, anyone. I also know, and I get a lot of questions and I get a lot of emails from people, whether they're parents or sometimes students, and I don't disagree that we do, that we should be soliciting input from all stakeholders. You're 100% right. Parents, employees have reached out, unions have reached out. We want to be at the table. We want to be at the table. We want to be at the table. I wish I can ask everybody to come to the table with their ideas. Unfortunately, where we are at the moment, it doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense to get everyone's ideas on how to do this when we didn't know what the rules were. Because the last thing in the world I want to do is somebody come with a great idea and say, that's great, thanks for putting all that time and effort into it, but on page 12 it says we can't do that. So that's what the delay in soliciting necessarily input from all of our stakeholders is. We will be at a point when all the rules are clarified and we know what we're allowed to do and what we're not allowed to do, that we'll have an opportunity to solicit input, not just on what has worked in the past for us, but what people would like to see as long as it's within the confines. But we can't have those conversations to the extent we'd like to have them because we're coming up against a roadblock at every turn that we make. Because I'll give you another example. There's another district who shared their idea for the hybrid plan. And this is one of the ideas that came up in our meeting. I'm looking at Wendy about split shifts. Maybe we do an AM session and a PM session. Under no circumstances was that endorsed by the commissioner's office yesterday on our call. And the reason was the governor made it very clear that if we're going to reopen, we're reopening for all kids, all day, every day. The plan says we can do it, we can do it. So a district said, we're thinking about doing AM, PM shifts. Very politely, they were told, they were rebuffed. That's not what the directive was from the governor. So I don't want to spend a lot of time coming up with AM, PM shifts when I already know the state's going to tell us we can't do that. Now, that's under the full reopening. If we had to go to a hybrid, there's conversations about whether we can do alternate days and things along those lines. But I'm going to be completely honest. It is extremely gray right now about what the definition of a hybrid model is. That's the one thing I want. I just want those who are watching at home to think, not to think that we're not interested in getting opinions from all of our stakeholders, staff included. But right now, until we know what the requirements are, until we have a firm understanding on what we're permitted to do, I just don't want to waste anyone's time because time is going to be very valuable and very precious. The last thing that I want to stress that gets reminded to me on every phone call that I'm on, whether it be with the commissioner's office, whether it be with the state epidemiologist, whether it be with legal counsel, all of this, all 150 pages of this, all of the 20 minutes I just been talking, is contingent upon the virus. And it's contingent upon what public health data says right now. The only reason we're talking about this is because Connecticut, and I don't want to jinx anything, is in a better position with its transmission rate than what some of our neighboring states are. So because our public health data says we are where we are, the state was comfortable saying you can start planning to come in person. But everybody, please take notice that any change in public health data, this is off the table. So we could very well spend the next 2.5 weeks not sleeping and putting a plan together, and then our numbers fluctuate and this can all go out the window. So I'm hopeful that's not the case. We're all keeping our fingers crossed that we've seen the worst of it, and the 3 months that we spent here in the state sort of locking down and everybody following the public warnings about staying home and locking everything down, that we've seen the worst. But as somebody said on the call yesterday, and it was a state employee, we haven't closed airports. And all these hotspots that we're seeing throughout the country, I'm sure on this screen, all of us know someone who's in one of those states right now. I know people who are in Myrtle Beach as we speak. Eventually, those people are coming home. So, and we hope that people follow the guidelines and self-quarantine for 14 days, but there's no guarantee that you can do that. So all of this is with a grain of salt that if our numbers don't change, we can proceed with our plan. That said, that was a very long superintendent's report, Ms. Thurston. I'm sorry, but this is the first time I've been able to talk about it since the guidelines came out. At that point, that will conclude the superintendent's report. That's enough for today.
It was worth it, I guess.
Thank you, Mr. Dresik. Gonna pass it around. We'll start with Mr. Ryder.
Pass what around?
No, I have questions. I'm sorry.
For the superintendent?
Yes, please.
Yeah, Mr.
No,
Frizell.
no, not at this time. I'll wait till board comments. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr.
Oh,
Dresik.
hold on, Mr. Frizell, I want to mention, I don't want to get all the way away from Robert's rules, but usually the superintendent's report ends and there's not a Q&A because that would be technically a second board member comment thing. So I don't want to
That's
violate
true.
any
All right.
Robert's rules.
So, okay, we can do it under board member comments then. Okay. So we'll move on to unfinished business. Policy revision number 6145, eligibility, extracurriculum activities, grades 6 through 12, second reading. Do I have a motion to
So
accept the
moved.
second reading? Moved by Mr. Rutledge. Seconded by Ms. Costa. Any discussion? So this is just a second reading from the, to approve the second reading, period. Kathy, roll call, please.
Mr. LeBlanc,
4,
Mr. Salazar,
4,
Mr. Rutledge,
4,
Mrs. Costa,
4,
Mrs. LeBlanc,
Nope.
Mrs. Hall,
Yes.
Mrs. Thurston,
Unmute yourself.
no,
Mr. Ryder,
4.
Chairman Krizell,
4,
motion passes.
thank you. So we did 7A already, so 7B is, I need a motion to cancel July 14th regular Board of Ed meeting.
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Hall,
second,
seconded by Ms. Thurston. Any discussion? Mr. Rutledge.
yes, just a question, as we'll be canceling this one on the 14th, will we be scheduling another one for early August, perhaps?
If needed, we will call one when needed.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other discussion? We need a roll call or hand vote?
A roll call.
Roll call, please.
Mr. LeBlanc,
4,
Mr. Salazar,
4,
Mr. Rutledge,
4,
Mrs. Costa,
4,
Mrs. LeBlanc,
Yes.
Mrs. Hall,
Yes.
Mrs. Thurston,
yes,
Mr. Ryder,
Yes.
Chairman Krizell,
4. Thank
motion
you.
passes.
Thank you. So now we get into board member comments and we'll start with Mr. Ryder.
I wanted to thank Mr. Dresik for taking the time to explain to our staff and, as importantly, our families who have so many questions right now regarding the reopening of schools in person come this fall. And I know that people have reached out to me, as well as I have reached out to, for example, the PTO leads, neighbors, friends of my children's parents, etc. I know that everybody has a lot of ideas and everybody has a lot of suggestions. But like Mr. Dresik said, until we knew kind of what the rules were, we didn't even know how to play this game because we didn't know what would be mandatory, what would be our purview to initiate or not within our buildings, what would be mandated, and what would be good common sense, although not required. So to that point, we did get 50 pages of materials 5-6 business days ago. Every other page had a link to an external website with more information and with more things to consider. Some required, some defined what was being suggested, and other. So now that we have some of our heads around most of what is required, we need to interject And with your input, with the public's input, with the staff's input, with our parents' inputs, our guardians, etc., our caretakers of our children, what isn't required but makes sense, or what isn't required but is suggested and doesn't work or may work for us, etc. Now we are at a point, or will be in the next few days, once we know how many kids are coming back, which is why this survey is so important. So I'll ask the PTO leads to remind people through the family pages. I'll ask neighbors that I see, if I recognize them behind their masks, to fill out these surveys as quickly and as accurately as possible, because of our 5,100 students at the close of last school year, which could be 55,092, it could be 5,112, whatever that number is. We need to know how many of those kids are coming back so we can safely and most effectively educate them, while at the same time keeping our staff safe. And that's not just our teachers. That's the secretaries that greet every person that comes through that door, whether it's the mailman, whether it's a parent picking up a child, whether my daughter forgot her lunch and I'm dropping off something. There's a community to our school buildings that isn't just our students, and it isn't just our one teacher per classroom, but it's our nurses, our principals, our administrators, our counselors, our cafeteria aides, our bus drivers. The school community is larger than any one address. And as soon as we know a little more about who's coming back and we can kind of start putting targets on those numbers, it is all of our purview, and it makes all of us better to get the input of all of these people within our communities. And I look forward to that. And I also look forward to a point where we can meet in person and people can come in person and share things with us. We're almost there. So please reach out via email, etc. Until then, please stay safe. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Ryder. Ms. Thurston, any comments? Unmute yourself.
I think the only thing is, I know everybody wants answers and everybody's doing the best they can to get the answers. And I just ask, people, like what Mr. Ryder said, to remain safe, but be patient, because the school is trying to get out the answers the best that we can as soon as we get them. So I think that's going to be the biggest thing. Just be patient and bear with us. And as soon as we have answers, we'll let you know. That's it.
Thank you, Ms. Thurston. Ms. Hall.
Mr. Dresser, thank you for answering some of my questions before I got to ask them. So I have one question left. What is the deadline for the parent survey?
The deadline for the parent survey is going to be a week from tomorrow. So the deadline for the staff survey is actually this Friday, and we're going to give parents a week till next Wednesday to complete. I would have loved to extend it longer, but unfortunately, time is not necessarily on our side. But that will all be included in the survey that goes out to parents tomorrow. And there'll be, and just to jump in on another question, as an example to what Mr. Ryder had said and Ms. Thurston had said, one of the questions that we had going into this was, from a district's perspective in planning, for that parent that chooses to opt out. The way the guidelines are crafted at the moment, there are no time restraints on that. So for instance, if I decide I'm not going to send my child to school, nothing prohibits me from changing my mind at any time. So if you remember conversations in the past about parents opting out of buses, there was that little disclaimer we could put in that we get 3 days before you're allowed to go back on the bus. Well, the way the guidelines are crafted at the moment, there are no time constraints. So if a parent changes their mind, and one of the fears we have is if we're going to plan for September 5th, and we think we have 60% of our kids coming back, and all of a sudden everybody changes their mind, we're not ready for 100% of our kids to come back. One of the things I felt a little more comfortable about today, and speaking with legal counsel, was They don't believe that's reasonable. Now, we can't keep parents out or in legally for extended periods of time, but they're currently working on a revision to put some sort of time restraint on that opt-out clause or the opt-in clause, meaning you have to give the district at least a week, 2 weeks, a month of leeway if you're going to come in, if you originally told us you weren't going to, so that we can better plan to bring people, have space available for those kids. I forgot to mention that earlier.
Ms. Hall, anything else?
One update, the Head Start program has been doing its self-assessment this week in order to plan its future. The other point is, I believe the guidelines mentioned somewhere in there, if I recall accurately, that after-school programs, those which are run by ERFC, could be a critical part of whatever opening school is involved with, but they haven't been mentioned yet. And that is another part of these guidelines weaknesses that keep frustrating us.
I have had conversations with our after-school programs as well as our parochial schools in town, because if we decide to close or we have, we transport those kids. So we're in the beginning stages of having that dialogue with those organizations too. But similar conversations that we're having about not necessarily having clear answers on what it is we're allowed to move forward with are going to dictate how we have those talks. But we are definitely in communication with all of our partners to make sure that whatever we do, we're including them in those discussions.
That's it.
Anything?
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hall. Ms. LeBlanc.
Yes, I just have a question for you. So once we submit the plan, when do we expect to hear back from the state? Did they give you a timeline, or?
We're not going to hear back from the state. The state's not approving our plan. The state's requiring us to submit a plan so they have a record of what everyone's doing. No approval process. So that's, again, causing some of the confusion that we're being told what we can do. We have to submit a plan, typically what would be for approval, but the state has made it very clear they're not going to approve our plan. They're going to share them for best practices with other districts throughout the state. So that's causing, I think, from my perspective and some of my colleagues, a little bit more confusion, because what if we do submit something that the state has an issue with? Although they're not approving it, do they have the right to amend it or do something? That's unclear at the moment. Like, I'll give you an example. When the summer school guidelines came out, it said very clearly no more than 10 kids per class. So I know a lot of parents that are reaching out to me saying, how are you going to fit 10 kids in the class in September? Well, the new guidelines don't say anything about 10 kids per class. New guidelines say try to keep kids 3 feet apart. No less than 3 feet apart, preferably up to 6. So it's that kind of, if we submit a plan and we're only 3 feet apart, although the state said that, but let's say we could do 3 feet apart, but we could fit 20 kids in the class because the room's big enough. Is the state going to take issue with that? We don't know.
Right.
Those are questions that I've been submitting as continuously to make sure we get clarification.
Right. The next question I have about the masks, would they be required to reuse them throughout the week, or what would the plan be? Or do you have an option to send your kid with their own mask?
Parents would always have the option to send their kids with the mask, although we're not going to make it a requirement. I don't want to be in a position where a child doesn't have access to a mask and therefore gets turned down.
Right.
So we will provide you with a mask. It's cloth, it's washable, it's reusable. We'll obviously have a recommendation. They're going to come with the mask, so I don't want to say what the recommended cleaning thing is because I haven't.
Gotcha.
But there will be guidelines, and that'll also be approved through our health director as well as our nursing staff as to what the recommendation is as far as keeping them clean. We are also going to have extras on hand. We had discussion today about what do we do about buses. Unfortunately, these masks here, for the amount that we would need and dispose them are, and you guys see them in stores right now. I mean, they're $10 a box for 30 of these. Well, we don't get much better pricing. The cloth reusable ones are $2 a box. So we're going to have extra on hand because no student or staff member will ever go without, and particularly for some of our younger kids. But we're also going to have to keep excess on the bus because what if a kid comes to a bus stop and grab his mask?
Right.
We're going to say to a 7-year-old, you can't get on today because you don't have your mask. We're going to have some available on all of our buses. So yeah, the cloth is the best because they are reusable. They can be washed. They can be hand washed. In my understanding, you don't have to run them in a wash machine every day. But it's a better solution than providing every day a disposable.
Okay. All right. And lastly, I just want to thank you for that detailed report. I took tons of notes so that I can work as a board member to get this information out there, since I'm one of the board members that tends to be on social media. And hopefully I can do my due diligence to try to get the parents to fill out that survey because it's very important for many reasons. So again, thank you. You answered a lot of questions I had. It was very detailed and I appreciate the information. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. LeBlanc. Now we'll go to the other end to Mr. LeBlanc.
So to go back to the survey, just to clarify, even for myself, the questions that are being asked, and you went into detail on this, but the questions that are being asked are being directed by the state. So it's not the district came up with these questions that said, oh, Enfield schools are going to ask how many kids plan on coming back. These questions are coming from the state of Connecticut, passed down to the district, and we're putting them into an Enfield school district survey.
Yes and no. The actual specific questions were revised internally to suit our needs. But the directive to survey parents and ask if they're going to come back, if they're going to opt out, if they're going to take transportation, that was directed from the state. We've tailored some of the questions to be a little bit more Enfield specific. They didn't require, for instance, us to ask about internet accessibility. But if we're going to have parents' attention, and we have it right now, this is information that's vital for us to know. So yes, we are being directed by the state to ask you if you're sending your kid back to school. The wording of the questions, we didn't just cut and paste what the state gave. We actually looked at a number of other surveys and kind of tailored it to our needs.
Okay. I asked because I know it's been going around town, and with our school reopen committee, it's even been discussed that we would put out a survey from a school reopen committee perspective. And I think there's been a lot of confusion on what the term survey means and who it's coming from. So that's why I just kind of want to clarify the direction on where this particular survey that's going out tomorrow is coming from.
That's coming from us because we're required to do it. I think there'll be opportunities as we start formulating and putting things concretely. There's a lot of information we still don't know, and we're trying to gather that as we speak. But I think there will be a place, as I said, to the reopen committee, the communication on what we're doing and soliciting input. That'll be also another avenue for you guys as board members to get input from the community, because I can tell you I'm getting it from staff. But there might be opportunities down the road as well to gather input in another format, whether it be a survey or a Q&A or something along those lines, to maybe fine tune some of the things that we're doing. But right now, the foundation of what we're doing, we're being told. And we're being directed. As a matter of fact, the survey I have to send back to the state on June 17th specifically asks how many of your parents are coming back, or how many of your parents are saying that they're sending your students back. How many people are riding the bus? They actually want me to reply on the 17th how much this whole thing is going to cost. I have no idea, and I've talked to probably 15 colleagues who said the same thing. I don't know. We're just going to give them. We have no idea. We don't know until we're living it. So but those are being directed by the state.
Okay. And this is by no means on the Enfield school administration whatsoever, and you even touched on it briefly, but the time frame for everything we're discussing, input for the survey results to be completed. I mean, we're 7.5 weeks away from school. It's scary to think that we have all the time in the world to figure this stuff out. I mean, and this is again more directed towards the state. Things got to get moving, and I know it's all contingent on the virus and whatnot, but we don't have a lot of time whatsoever. So I think, you know, people got to start adjusting and realizing that as well, that, you know, there's a lot of questions, but if we're going to get back in school in September, answers need to start coming for sure. So that's all.
Thank you, Mr. LeBlanc. Mr. Salazar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I do have some questions and some comments, but I want to pick up where my colleague, Mr. LeBlanc, just ended regarding input. I heard Mr. Dresek say, and I don't want to paraphrase him correctly, but it sounded to me like input is not needed or welcome at this point in time.
Oh,
Because
I might correct you there. That's not what I said. I said right now, their input is important, but I don't believe right now, until we understand what legally we're allowed to do, soliciting input on something to tell people that is not attainable is probably not in our best interest given the time constraint.
okay, so that confuses me a little because, and again, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, far from it, but you stated on several occasions that the state is not clear with the guidelines. You and other administrators find yourselves on the same boat, having to go back, consulting with attorneys, having more questions than answers are provided. It seems like that's a trend with the state. That being the trend, then I would expect that this will continue for quite some time. So at which point in time does the input then become relevant? If you know, like my colleague just stated, we're 7.5 weeks away from opening. And I think that there's no reason why ideas, whether good or bad, you know, cannot be shared, maybe noted. Doesn't mean that we act on every single one of them, but I think ideas that the public may have would be a good source of, pardon the redundancy, input. So I sense a hesitation from you and your team to gather that input at this point in time. Am I correct in that assumption?
I wouldn't say that you're correct in that assumption. I'd say putting together a plan of this magnitude when it's all of our responsibility to find out what we're permitted to do, and gathering input and ideas that may not be feasible in such a short period of time. I'd rather find out what the rules of the game are before we start trying to design plays with it. Maybe that's a bad metaphor. And you are correct. There is not a lot of clarity at this point, but the way the process works is trying to find out exactly what the parameters are for us to make this happen. And then from the input that I've received from parents and from staff are more geared toward operational things that might help the work that help their, you know, whether it be individual students or groups of students, have a better experience. But until we know what the foundation is going to be, I'm hesitant to go down a particular road with getting into specifics when we are such constraints we have so many constraints with time before we can lay the foundation on what the return is going to be. So maybe I didn't articulate that well enough in my statement, but I want to make sure that we know exactly what we're permitted to do and how we're permitted to do that. And then the reason we don't have a blanket reopening state of Connecticut plan, and the commissioner made this very clear yesterday, was because there was an emphasis on putting back local control into what school districts are doing, right, wrong, or indifferent. Now, it would make everyone's life easier if the state said, this is how you're reopening, go ahead and do it. We wouldn't have to figure it all out on ourselves. But within that local control, there are things that we don't control. So we want to make sure that we're able to get the foundation built for reopening schools in September with the anticipation of tailoring that to the needs of the Enfield Public Schools, like we have a history of doing on everything that we've accomplished here, at least since I've been sitting in this chair. And we've done that by soliciting input from all of our stakeholders, not just parents, but staff, elected officials, not just the 9 of you, but when we've done projects throughout my tenure here, we've opened up conversations with our town council counterparts. I don't see that being any different now, but I don't know what we're not 100% certain on what we're permitted to do yet. What we do know is what we're acting on. We know if kids are going to come back, that there's certain parameters in place when it comes to things like space and physical space. When we start getting into, how we're going to teach certain things and what programs are going to work, there's going to be a completely different conversation if this whole thing goes virtual, because we know we just went off of 4 months of virtual learning that we created overnight out of necessity. Well, we know it didn't work for every kid, and we know it didn't work for every family. And if that's a direction that we're going to go in, that's important input we need to get, not just from the families and from the students, but we also know it didn't work for every teacher. So that's input that's important. But right now, we're being told, prepare to open your buildings for every kid to show up, hypothetically, on September 5th, and you need to do X, Y, and Z, then we need to get our house in order before we can start talking about how we tailor it specifically to work for us. Because right now, the same rules that we're discussing at this point are the rules that are universal for every district in the state. Once we get that foundation built, then yes, we can tailor whatever our reopening plan is to make sure it meets the needs of Enfield's kids and Enfield staff and Enfield parents. So that's where I was going with the time and the place for input. Nobody's input is going to change anything in that 50-page document because those are requirements the state's making us do. So I don't want to sit here and tell parents or staff members, we're going to have very difficult conversations with elementary teachers because they got rooms full of stuff right now that are going to have to be empty. But that's the way it's interpreted now, and I'm being told we have to do it. So it's making sure we take care of building the foundation for this reopening plan and tailoring it, and where input, so in my perspective, is important, is when we tailor it to meet our needs as a community, that's when we solicit the input from our community.
Okay. Well, let's hope that timeline is soon, where there will be clarification from the state. Now, with the experience that you have, you being the superintendent, I'm sure you speak to your colleagues. Is there any kind of expectation that is being placed on the state as to by when you need to have answers to all the questions? Because the state can come back the week before school starts, and then input and decision making and all that, then it's really removed from the local jurisdictions, and then by default fell on the state.
Nothing definitively at this point, but what I can share is the amount of communication we have with the State Department of Ed has increased over the last couple of days. For instance, we had a call with the Commissioner and his team yesterday. We now have a webinar on Thursday with the State Department, and they're going to give a presentation to help clarify some of the gray areas that are in the plan. But I understand the frustrations that either you or members of the community will have, because the plan is out, and the expectation might be that when you have the plan, you have the rules, what's our plan going to look like? But when you take a step back and realize the position that sometimes we're put in, here we are, the state knew the plan, they created the plan, yet we're not having a webinar till July 9th. Yet they haven't changed the deadlines. I still have to submit the first survey by the 17th and then the final one by the 24th. So yes, there are frustrations building from myself and my colleagues that we are sharing up the chain of command. I realize, as this is new for everyone. No one's ever had to work in the conditions in our lifetime in a pandemic. But at the same time, there is a lot of constraints being put on local boards of education there is a need and a want to get our kids back in school. There's a need and a want to make sure we do it safely, but there's also a lot of concern that if we don't do it by the requirements they're giving us, that in some capacity we may be liable down the road for something. So those frustrations are being expressed up through the chain of command at the state. To be honest, I think one voice in this whole entire process that hasn't come out yet is collective bargaining and organized labor. So I sent a message to you guys earlier that we've given indication that the plan is anticipated to change in some capacity. And I think when organized labor expresses their views on this, we may see some shifts in some of these things. So that's another thing that's kind of, we don't have any control over. So, we made the decision starting on Monday that we're going to start meeting daily to put our plan together and start communicating it once we know. And if they throw us another curveball, we'll deal with it. And at the end of the day, if we stay focused on what's important for our kids and our families, then we'll continue to do the right thing.
Well, that's a nice segue into my other question. You made a statement that the state is asking us to do some things that are illegal, or at least are perceived to be illegal by the attorneys. And so, illegal in what context?
So, for instance, and I don't know the exact page number, but in the guidelines, there's a section called transportation. So, in transportation, one of the bullet points, and by the time I pull it up, it'll be too late.
No worries.
But if you just refer to whatever the transportation tab is, it says very clearly, local boards of education cannot compel parents to drive their own kids to school. Public schools are required to transport kids who qualify for public school transportation. And you look at this two bullet points down, it says, do everything you can to compel students to drive their own kids to school. So, okay, if I'm going to take that, did I just violate the law that's one bullet point above that? And I actually had an in-depth conversation with our attorneys today that said, don't do that. You need more information before you make plans. So make as many plans as you can. And there's certain areas that you're going to have to put on pause until we get clarification, because we can't advise you to go down that step, even though that's what it says. And in good faith, you're doing it. In reality, that could come back to bite you 6 months down the road. So it's examples like that. And it's kind of littered within the document of things that we typically don't, are always guided not to do. Like, for instance, when a parent withdraws, if they withdraw for homeschooling, we're essentially done with the family. Like, we don't have any obligations to provide anything. Well, now they're saying you have to provide. Well, what if a parent technically says, I'm going to homeschool? Maybe they don't understand the term homeschool, and I don't provide distance learning to that family. Are we in some sort of legal jeopardy for that? So it's references like that are concerning, that are kind of littered throughout this document that we really need clarification.
Well, thank you for that clarification. You mentioned about cohorting, and I wanted to understand this part and said it's really, you try to explain to parents that even though this is something that it's being planned to be put in at schools, it doesn't necessarily guarantee that the children will only be with that cohort throughout the day. And you said it's likely that they're going to interact and be in the proximity of other children on the bus. But for parents that are driving their kids and picking them up, then the cohorting, in fact, is going to provide that separation, let's call it. Is that?
In theory, yes. But one of the big things we have to work out logistically is, where are we going to feed children? So if you cohort and you are able to feed in the classroom, then yes, in theory, that would be accurate. In reality, depending upon who's in that cohort, there may be dietary restrictions, allergies, things along those lines, where we just physically can't feed in all those classrooms. So we may have to utilize other spaces in the building for lunch, then in turn would break the cohort up. So it's those types of things that we really need to get our head around. I just don't want parents to get this misconception that, a comfort level that my child is only going to be with these kids all day, therefore I'm comfortable sending him or her. When in reality, I can't make that promise to them at this point in time.
Okay. The other point for clarification, you stated that there are, in fact, teachers and faculty, maybe administrators as well, that are measuring out classrooms to make sure how many 36 square foot areas you can divide the classroom into. I guess that assumes, say, 3 feet in each direction. So then you have 6 feet, and that's 36 feet across. 36 feet in an area, but we're looking for 3 feet, right? Which would mean that at the end of my 3 feet, I don't have another 3 feet to start from. So we're looking at 9 square feet, not 36 square feet.
Yeah, did I say 36? I'm sorry.
Okay. All right. No, just clarification. No, that's those are my questions and clarifications. I appreciate all the information you've shared, and I sincerely appreciate the effort you, Andy, and everybody else in leadership is placing on the developing and obtaining the information, developing the plan and obtaining the necessary information. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Salazar. Mr. Rutledge.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have no comments at this time, reserving them for my policy committee report.
Okay, Mr. Rutledge. Ms. Costa.
Yep, I'll try and keep it brief. Thanks a lot for the update, Mr. Drezek. I was taking so many notes, I thought I missed the deadline for the survey, so thank you, Ms. Hall, for clarifying that. I did want to mention Parkman PTO has come out with Parkman-specific masks that the parents can purchase for their children, and I have seen people doing that, both in children's size and in adult sizes. So that was kind of nice to see. I'm hoping that, because you talked a lot about how, even as a parent, how do you answer the question now, whether you're going to send your child to school when you don't know all the rules? I'm hopeful that when it comes to a parent saying, you know what, I'm going to keep my child home, but I'm going to do distance learning, that we're going to be able to provide enough specificity around that distance learning that sort of is almost like a contract with the student and the teacher, that this is what it means to do distance learning in the fall. It's not going to be like the spring. This is what it means. And we're not going to do packets because you like packets better, but oh, you can do online because you like online better, and that we're not going to have the flavor of what every student wants, both from the perspective of a parent making a well-advised decision, as well as us not running 400 different distance learning programs for 400 students, but it's more of these are your choices at school. It's this distance learning program that will probably vary by age or grade level, but so that's just my hope. I did want to just clarify one thing. I think the answer is the same. I didn't mean to imply an AM and a PM schedule. I was really asking about just for the month of September, if the younger grades could only go for, say, 4 hours or 5 hours a day instead of the full, just to get them used to wearing masks. And just that sort of thing. And I understand, I guess, the reasons why we can't do that, but I wasn't trying to suggest that we do both. And then my only other comment that I'll make, that I made a couple months ago, but it would seem that our next board meeting is August 25th. And I know that we can call a special meeting anytime we need to, but I think it's unrealistic to think that we can go until August 25th without meeting. With all that's going on with school reopening, probably policies that are going to need to be approved related to the reopening, just everything else. So I'll just throw that out there. And that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Costa. So I just want to say thank you, Mr. Drezek, Mr. Longi, central office staff, all administration, principals, vice principals that are working, canceling vacations to get this work done, and also faculty and teachers to work through the summer. This shows that our staff cares. They want their kids back in the school. So I just want to thank them all personally. And we'll get through this together. That's all. And everybody else said pretty much everything else, so I'll leave it at that. So we go to number 9, board committee reports, curriculum, Mr. Salazar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We had our last meeting last week on Thursday. We discussed an update to the curriculum plan that is being developed and some of the things that they're taking into account to come up with the plan. That continues to be a productive conversation. We also reviewed the application of a model that's being used in the different grades to apply to additional grades. And we agreed to hold our next curriculum meeting the week after the plan is turned over to the state. So that in a nutshell is the report for the curriculum committee.
Thank you, Mr. Salazar. Finance, Ms. Costa.
Finance committee did not meet since the last board meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Costa. Mr. Rutledge, policy. You are muted.
You're muted.
Sorry about that. I thought I had hit unmute. My bad. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A few things. The next policy meeting is tomorrow, July 8th at 5:30 p.m. The meeting will be viewable on YouTube. Originally, there was an item on the agenda to allow for public comments. Unfortunately, our chairman of the board made the decision to remove that ability and to remove that off the agenda for the meeting. Further, as a reminder, given the recent approval of modifications to policy 9132, hopefully sometime in the near future, we can assign the committee alternates. During this upcoming meeting, we should be finishing the 5000 series. CABE has also sent us a number of policies for consideration that involve distance learning, virtual meetings, emergency procedures, and one-on-one tablet usage. So those items are also on the agenda. And I'd also like to thank Mr. Longi for forwarding it to CABE and for CABE for reviewing a policy that, if implemented, would allow for public comments to be offered at Board of Ed meetings via remote means. When I say this, I speak for myself and not on behalf of the other members of the policy committee. This aforementioned policy, the one I've been speaking about for a while, that would allow for remote communications, it is not in any way offered to push a personal agenda, and frankly suggesting that as being a little bit dismissive. I've been suggesting this for months, and I've submitted this because it's the right thing to do, because one of the most common questions I'm asked when public comments are going to open back up. It's really as simple as that, and I think it's time this board was open to 21st century avenues of communication. Other boards have adopted a similar policy all across the state. CABE has been given a draft of this policy of an initial review, and they've offered some very constructive feedback that will be incorporated before it's considered. According to CABE, there would need to be a legal review of the policy due to the expansion of public comments, but that's not unique to this policy, and given the number of other boards allowing virtual communications, it is a consideration that would not be unique to this board. Though, as we've seen tonight and at previous meetings, we allow for special guests to present to this board, so why not allow for public comments like so many other boards around the state are doing? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rutledge. Leadership, we have none. Joint Facilities is meeting this Thursday to continue. We're trying to finish the third phase of roof for Barnard, and also possibly go for referendum on some other roofs. And JFK building was pretty self-explanatory. They were our guests today. So that work is proceeding ahead of schedule, like said. So I want to thank Gilbane and all their staff for stepping up and getting a lot of that work done. Joint security. Anyone want to take that one?
We're still waiting to see when the next meeting is at this point.
Okay. School reopening committee, Ms. Costa.
Yep, the school reopening committee met last Tuesday. It was about 24 hours after getting the state guidelines. So we just did a high-level review of those. And that was basically it. We had to cut the meeting off because of a follow-up meeting for the board. Thank you.
Thank you. Joint insurance committee hasn't met, other than I know the town went for a different carrier for our workman's comp and property and casualty insurance. And then any other additional committees, I know it's been, and I should have brought this up to JFK. They are trying to get together for a groundbreaking, and we're hoping to have a date, probably late August, in September or so, but I know we're working on that. So with that, let's go to number 10, approval of special Board of Ed meeting minutes, June 23rd. Do I have a
So
motion?
moved.
Moved by Ms. Thurston, seconded by Ms. Costa.
Sure.
Any discussion? I just do want to say that the minutes did show that we were going to have tonight's meeting. I did ask at that meeting that this meeting was to be present. So I just want to make that point of order. So raise your hands, all in favor? I see everybody's hand. All right, so that's 9 in favor. Approval of special Board of Ed meeting minutes, June 30th, 2020. Do I
So
have a-
moved.
Moved by Ms. Thurston,
Second,
seconded by Ms. Hall. Any discussion? All in favor, raise your hand. And I do see everybody's hands, so it's 9 in favor, 0 against. 11, correspondence and communication. We have none. Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn, Mr. Chairman.
Motion by Ms. Thurston, seconded by Mr. Rutledge. Any discussion? All in favor?
Woohoo!
We are adjourned. Thank you very much and good night all.
Good night.